"That bag belongs to me. Somebody stop him, he's a thief." The scream cut through the low hum of Terminal 3 like a fire alarm in a library. Every head turned, every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones dropped to sides, children grabbed parents' hands, and in the center of it all stood a man who had not moved a single inch. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm, but from discipline. His charcoal overcoat was immaculate, despite a 9-hour flight. His jaw was set, his eyes were level. His left hand held the telescoping handle of a matte black aluminum suitcase, extended smoothly like he had done this 10,000 times before, because he had. The woman screaming was not looking at the bag. She was looking at the crowd. She was measuring the room, calculating the angle of sympathy, timing the tremor in her voice with the practiced precision of someone who had done this before, too. Just not as many times. Her name was Patricia Hollis, and she had just made the worst decision of her 57 years on this earth. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Terminal 3 baggage claim. 11:23 p.m. on a Wednesday in November. Flight 771 from London Heathrow had arrived 83 minutes late, dumping 314 exhausted passengers into a carousel area that smelled of recycled air, stale coffee, and the particular desperation of people who just want to go home. The fluorescent lights above Carousel 6 buzzed with a thin, almost imperceptible vibration that burrowed into the back of your skull after 30 seconds. The belt ground forward in its endless mechanical loop. The floor was scuffed and damp from 100 rolling suitcases. An automated announcement cycled overhead in English, then Spanish, then Mandarin, telling nobody in particular to keep their luggage within eyesight at all times. Nobody was listening to the announcement anymore. They were listening to Patricia Hollis, and they were looking at the man she was pointing at. He still hadn't moved. He didn't yell back. He didn't raise his free hand. He didn't look to the crowd for validation or to the ceiling for patience. He simply stood with the suitcase in his grip and looked at the woman in the beige coat with an expression that was completely, almost unnervingly calm. If you had walked into that terminal at that exact moment, the image your brain would have assembled in under 3 seconds would have told you one story. A story written in assumptions older than any of us. A story that Patricia Hollis was counting on every single person in that room to believe without question. A tall black man, an expensive bag, a frantic white woman in tears. The story wrote itself. What that image would not have told you, what Patricia Hollis didn't know, what Officer Derek Shaw, charging over from the far end of the hall, didn't know, what Supervisor Carol Weston, reaching for her radio, didn't know, was the ending. What they didn't know was that the man standing at Carousel 6 with that matte black Rimowa aluminum trunk was Marcus Abels, founder, CEO. The man who had spent the last 4 days in London closing a $47 million acquisition deal for his cybersecurity firm. The man who had a platinum Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist, a global entry pass in his breast pocket, and a phone that contained, near the very top of his contacts, listed simply as Raymond. Emergency. The private cell number of the most feared civil rights attorney in the state of Illinois. What they didn't know was that in exactly 27 minutes, 3 black Lincoln Navigators were going to bypass the arrivals lane, pull onto the restricted law enforcement curb outside this very terminal, and deposit a legal team that would make every person in that baggage claim room wish they had looked a little harder before they assumed. But first, they were going to arrest him, and he was going to let them. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you have ever been judged before anyone bothered to ask your name, if you have ever walked into a room and felt the temperature shift before you said a single word, hit that subscribe button, because this story was built for you. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because you need to understand exactly who was standing at that carousel and what was about to be done to him. Marcus Abels did not travel the way people expected him to. There was no entourage. No assistant trailing behind with a second phone and a schedule printout. No bodyguard scanning the terminal with the exaggerated vigilance of a man being paid to look important. No designer carry-on with logos stitched large enough to announce themselves from across the room. He came through the customs doors alone, the way he had come through every door in his life. Alone ahead and entirely self-contained. He was 36 years old, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, in a neighborhood where ambition was either rewarded with escape or punished with disappointment, and very little in between. He stood 6 feet 2 inches, and he carried himself with a posture that was not arrogance and not aggression, but something closer to precision. The bearing of a man who understood that how you held your body in a room was a language, and he had become fluent in it by necessity. His clothes were not flashy. They were never flashy. A high thread count black turtleneck, the kind whose quality you felt rather than saw. Dark charcoal dress slacks with a clean break at the ankle. A charcoal overcoat, double-breasted, that moved with him rather than hanging off him. Oxford shoes, black, polished to the point where the Terminal 3 ceiling lights made 2 small, warped reflections in the toe caps. No visible logos anywhere. Not a single branded item. The only thing on Marcus Abel's that announced its own value was the watch on his left wrist. A Patek Philippe Calatrava in platinum with a white dial, the kind of timepiece that people who knew about such things recognized immediately, and people who didn't know thought was simply silver and nice. Marcus had bought it the day Vertex Shield crossed $100 million in annual revenue. He had not told anyone he bought it. He simply put it on that morning and went back to work. His wealth did not announce itself. It existed. He stepped away from the customs exit and moved through the thinning crowd toward baggage claim Carousel 6 with the measured pace of a man who had logged more flight hours in the last 3 years than most commercial pilots. He was not anxious. He was not rushed. He knew the bag would arrive when it arrived, and hurrying toward the carousel would not change that by a single second. He stopped 3 paces back from the belt and stood there, hands at his sides, watching the heavy rubber flaps at the chute mouth. The bag he was waiting for was not a bag you forgot. He had been traveling with it for 4 years. A Rimowa aluminum classic matte black, the kind of piece that announced a specific level of discernment without screaming about it. But Marcus's was different from every other Rimowa aluminum classic on the planet, and he knew the differences precisely. The telescoping handle had been replaced with brushed titanium, custom machined by the lead engineer at Vertex Shield, after the original plastic mechanism had cracked during a layover in Singapore. It was a gift from the team presented at the company's 5-year anniversary dinner in a small velvet box, which was perhaps the most ridiculous gift wrapping for an aluminum suitcase handle in the history of corporate America, and Marcus had kept the box on his desk ever since. The bottom left corner of the case bore a faint, shallow scuff, a scar from a taxi door in Seoul 2 years ago that no amount of polishing had ever fully erased. Marcus had stopped trying to remove it. He considered it cartography, evidence of distance. And the interior, the foam lining that cradled the contents of the case during travel, was a color that existed nowhere else in the Rimowa catalog. It was a deep, specific shade of navy blue custom-cut foam that Vertex Shield's operations manager had ordered to match the company's brand color when the case was being modified. There was not another Rimowa on Earth with that interior. Not one. The rubber flaps at the mouth of Carousel 6 parted. Bag after bag emerged. Black fabric rollers, brown hard shells, a bright orange duffel that someone's eyes immediately lit up for. Marcus waited with the patience of a man who had learned that patience, real patience, was perhaps the most expensive thing in the world, and also the most free. Then the matte black aluminum appeared. It slid down the ramp with a solid weight to it, the titanium handle catching the overhead lights for one brief silver flash. Marcus stepped forward, 2 steps smooth and unhurried, reached down and gripped the handle. The weight of it was familiar and grounding, the way that objects you have carried a long time begin to feel like extensions of your body rather than objects you carry. He set it upright on the floor, extended the telescoping handle with one practiced motion, and turned toward the exit. He had taken exactly 4 steps when he heard her. "Excuse me." The voice came from his right 2 o'clock, and something about the pitch of it, not the volume, not the anger, but the particular frequency of a person who has already decided the outcome of a conversation before having it, made Marcus slow without fully stopping. "Excuse me, that is my suitcase." He turned his head. Patricia Hollis was 57 years old and wore the kind of composed confidence that came from a lifetime of being right by default. Her beige trench coat was cinched at the waist. Her silk scarf, red knotted loosely at the throat, was the kind of accessory that communicated ease rather than effort. Her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back. Her oversized designer sunglasses were pushed up into her hair the way women push sunglasses when they want you to see their eyes clearly. She was not looking at the suitcase when she said it. She was looking at the crowd around them. And in the fraction of a second before she arranged her face into its appropriate expression of outrage, Marcus Abels saw something flicker behind those eyes. Not panic, not genuine recognition. Something cooler and more deliberate than either of those things. Calculation. He had seen that look before. Not often, but enough. Enough to know what came next. Enough to know that the next several minutes were going to be something he could not reason or evidence his way out of. Only survive. He looked down at the titanium handle in his hand. He looked back at Patricia Hollis. "I don't think so, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying exactly the tone of a man who intends to remain calm, regardless of what the other person decides to do next. "This is my bag." He had no idea in that moment how bad it was about to get. He was about to find out. Patricia Hollis did not blink. "I checked that exact bag in London this morning," she said, her voice climbing precisely enough to carry to the 6 nearest bystanders without yet reaching the register of a full scene. "Matte black Remova. I would know it anywhere." "Remova is a popular brand," Marcus replied. His voice, still level, still quiet, still entirely unmoved. "I'm certain yours will come through on the belt shortly. This one, however, has my name on it." He tilted the case slightly, angling the leather luggage tag on the side handle toward her as a gesture of simple, patient evidence presenting. He was not defensive. He was not challenging. He was doing what a reasonable person did when presented with a misunderstanding, offering the clarifying fact. Patricia did not look at the tag. She did not look at the handle. She did not look at the bag at all. Her eyes swept the carousel area with the practiced efficiency of a woman taking a head count, measuring how many people had shifted their attention toward this exchange, calculating the precise moment to shift from contained concern to public alarm. She found enough faces turned her way. "That belongs to me," she said again, but louder this time. Not because Marcus hadn't heard, but because the couple to his left hadn't, and neither had the young man with the rolling duffel 3 feet behind. Marcus took a breath so small it was invisible. "Ma'am, I lifted this bag off the carousel myself. If you'd like to check the manifest with the airline, I'm happy to." "I don't need to check anything," Patricia said, and she stepped forward, and she reached out and grabbed the telescoping handle of the suitcase, right over Marcus's hand. Her grip was not tentative. It was not the accidental contact of someone reaching for something in the dark. It was a full, deliberate claim, fingers closing around the brushed titanium, with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed this motion, who knew exactly how it would look to the people watching. A woman trying to hold on to what was hers. Marcus did not pull back. He stood completely still, the handle in his right hand, her fingers wrapped over his, and he looked at her with an expression that contained no heat, no fear, and no confusion, only a kind of cold, absolute clarity. "Let go of my property," he said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. "He's stealing it." Patricia's voice hit the upper register, now the tremor arriving exactly on schedule, cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal with the precision of a tuning fork struck against stone. "Somebody help me. Security!" He grabbed my bag right off the belt. The carousel area changed in under 4 seconds. The low murmur of tired travelers dissolved. Heads snapped around. A child grabbed its father's coat. 2 women near the far belt stopped moving entirely. A man in a business suit looked up from his phone, looked at the scene, and took 2 steps backward. Not toward the argument, but away from it. The unconscious repositioning of someone who doesn't want to be involved, but can't stop watching. Phones came out, slowly at first, then faster, and in those 4 seconds, Marcus Abels made a decision. Not a conscious deliberation, but the hard-wired, practiced response of a man who had learned early, and learned precisely what his options were when this specific configuration of forces assembled around him. He knew what he looked like to every stranger in this terminal right now. He knew the narrative that Patricia Hollis was writing with her tears and her volume and her grip on that handle. He knew that the physics of this situation, a tall black man in an altercation with a distressed white woman over a piece of expensive luggage, had a gravitational pull toward a single outcome, and that pulling against it would only accelerate the fall. So he didn't pull. He stood still. Among the faces turning toward them, 3 were paying closer attention than the rest. Near the far end of the carousel area, a young woman in her late 20s had already raised her phone to a steady, horizontal position. Her name was Isabella Vega, 29 years old, travel journalist, a lifestyle and adventure content creator with 280,000 subscribers, and a person who had stopped at Terminal 3's Carousel 6 because her own bag was somewhere on that belt. She had watched Patricia Hollis from the moment the woman had come rushing in from the wrong side of the carousel. She had watched the direction Patricia came from. She had watched the hand reach for the handle. And she had pressed record before Patricia's voice reached its first peak. The live stream was running. 12 people were watching. Then 23. Then 67 and climbing. Behind the loose ring of onlookers, a man in his early 60s stood with his jacket over one arm, and the studied stillness of someone who had learned to process what he was seeing before he reacted. Thomas Greer, 63, ran a mid-sized restaurant group with locations across Chicago. He had flown out of O'Hare twice a month for 11 years. He had watched enough to know what rushed looked like versus what performed looked like. He stood and watched Patricia Hollis perform. And he said nothing yet, but his jaw set in a particular way. And at the far edge of the forming crowd, just past the rope divider for the carousel area, a younger man in an airport security uniform heard the commotion and turned. Junior Officer Kyle Reyes, 26 years old, 8 months into the job, pulled his radio from its clip. Patricia had not released the handle. She had, in fact, tightened her grip, pulling the case slightly toward herself in a way that looked to bystanders like retrieval, and looked to Marcus like what it was. Theater. "I know what I packed," she said, and now her voice had shifted register again, lower, more intimate, designed for the ring of watchers rather than the man in front of her. "I know exactly what's inside it. He grabbed it before I could get there. He ran right past me." None of this was true. The security camera directly above Carousel 6 would confirm this later in a gray, concrete room on a tablet screen in front of people whose careers depended on what it showed. But that was 27 minutes away. "I didn't run," Marcus said. "I walked. 4 steps. You can count the footage." "I want to see what's inside," Patricia said loud enough for the crowd. "If it's mine, I'll know immediately." "You're not opening anything," Marcus replied. "Remove your hands from my bag." She didn't. She turned to the nearest cluster of bystanders instead, and her voice found that frequency again, the one calibrated for maximum reach. "I know what I packed. My medication is in there. My late husband's watch." Her eyes moved across the faces around her, landing on sympathy like a chess player picking squares. "Please, someone." The temperature in the carousel area shifted slightly. A few faces that had been neutral angled toward concern. Not for Marcus, for her. For the story she was telling. For the medication, the husband's watch, the tears that arrived as if on cue in the outer corners of both eyes. Thomas Greer at the back watched this and pressed his lips together. Isabella Vega's live stream counter ticked 340 viewers. Marcus looked at Patricia Hollis for a long moment. He looked at her the way you look at something you have seen before in different packaging, in different terminals, at different stages of your life. And then he said quietly, just loud enough for the people immediately around them to hear, "There is no watch in this bag. There is no medication. And you know that." He did not say it with anger. He did not say it with accusation. He said it the way someone states a weather condition. Cold, factual, present tense. Patricia's chin lifted. "People like this," she said, and she let the sentence hang there, incomplete, deliberate, its meaning carried entirely by the pause and by the sweep of her eyes from Marcus's face down to his shoes and back up again. The air changed. Something in it curdled. Marcus finished her sentence for her, but not the way she had left it open. "Say the rest of it," he said. "Go ahead. Finish the sentence." She didn't. She looked at the crowd instead. What Patricia Hollis did next was not amateur. It was the move of someone who understood at a deep and unreflective level exactly how the machinery of public sympathy operated, what fueled it, and how to point it. She let go of the handle. She stepped back. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her shoulders curved inward. She looked to anyone who hadn't been watching for the past 3 minutes like a woman who had just been frightened, who had reached for something she believed was hers and found herself facing someone larger and more aggressive than she could handle. "I'm sorry," she said loud enough to carry, but pitched to sound like it was barely getting through. "I'm sorry, I'm frightened. He was so aggressive when I first spoke to him, and my medication is in there and I don't—" The sob was perfectly timed, not messy or ugly, the kind that communicated distress while preserving dignity, the kind that made bystanders want to do something about it. And 2 bystanders across the carousel area heard it through a radio. Officer Derek Shaw had the kind of walk that announced his intentions 15 feet before he arrived. Chest forward, hand already resting on his belt, eyes doing a pre-arrival assessment that had already concluded the scene before he had the full picture. He was 44 years old, had been working airport security for 16 of them, and he had a particular pattern of response that he would have described as experience, and that a more accurate observer might have described as habit dressed up as instinct. He arrived at the carousel and took in the scene in under 3 seconds. His eyes moved, and this was the sequence, and it mattered. From Patricia Hollis's wet eyes to Marcus Abels's face to the expensive aluminum suitcase in Marcus's hand. The conclusion formed before the questions were asked. Behind, Shaw Supervisor Carol Weston moved more slowly, her radio already in her hand, her eyes doing a slower and slightly more thorough scan of the situation. She was 51, career airport administration, and she had more patience than Shaw. But she also had less authority in the dynamic between them in any given field moment, and she knew it. Patricia looked at Shaw, and her face collapsed further with relief. Marcus looked at Shaw and understood immediately that the next 10 minutes were going to require every gram of discipline he possessed. "What is going on here?" Shaw said, not to the room, to Patricia. His body language was already facing her. "He took my bag," Patricia said, and her voice was steady now, the tears controlled enough for coherent speech. "I was right there when it came off the belt, and he grabbed it. I tried to get his attention, I tried to explain, and he got aggressive." "Ma'am." Shaw put one hand out toward her in a calming gesture and turned the other toward Marcus. "Sir, let me see the bag." "This is my bag," Marcus said, and his voice had not changed in pitch or volume since the conversation began. "The woman approached me after I had already lifted it from the belt. I would like you to check the luggage tag and the carousel manifest, and then I would like to leave this terminal." Shaw looked at the tag hanging from the side handle. He reached out and flipped it over. The plastic sleeve that had covered the information card, the sleeve Patricia's frantic grip had torn half loose during the confrontation, was cracked and bent. The card inside shifted, the printed name partially obscured. Shaw looked up at Marcus. "Tag's damaged." "She damaged it," Marcus said, "when she grabbed the bag. The camera above us recorded the entire interaction. I'll be the one deciding what we need to look at," Shaw said. Weston had her radio to her mouth. Kyle Reyes was 10 feet away watching. Isabella Vega's counter read 1,147 viewers. And Patricia Hollis pressed her hand to her chest and said to no one in particular, "Thank God. Thank God someone's here." The first thing Derek Shaw did when he arrived at the center of the situation was make up his mind. This was not a conscious act. Shaw would not have described it that way. He would have said he was reading the scene, assessing the dynamics using 16 years of professional intuition to evaluate a volatile situation quickly before it deteriorated further. He would have said all of this and believed every word of it. But what actually happened in the 3 seconds between his arrival and his first action was simpler and older, and more damaging than any of those descriptions. His eyes took in the components, distressed white woman, tall black man, expensive piece of luggage, damaged tag, and something in the circuitry of his assumptions assembled them into a picture that his professional training had never sufficiently challenged. He stepped forward, putting himself between Patricia Hollis and Marcus Abels, which meant physically between the woman making the accusation and the man against whom it was being made, rather than in a neutral position that might have suggested impartiality. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the bag." Marcus did not step away from the bag. He looked at Shaw's uniform, at the badge at the supervisor, moving behind him, and he calibrated his response to the person most likely to be capable of reason. "Supervisor," he said, addressing Weston directly, making eye contact, keeping his voice level. "My name is Marcus Abels. I am the owner of this bag. I retrieved it from this carousel approximately 4 minutes ago. This woman approached me after I had already lifted it, grabbed the handle, and has since made several false statements about the interaction. I'd like this resolved properly." Weston started to respond. She opened her mouth and there was something in her eyes that suggested she was in fact listening, but Shaw moved in front of her eyeline. "I asked you to step away from the bag." "I heard you," Marcus said. "I'm choosing not to because this bag belongs to me and I'm not releasing it based on an accusation that hasn't been verified." Shaw's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works." "Then explain how it works," Marcus said. "Because the process I'm familiar with involves looking at a luggage tag, checking a carrier manifest, or reviewing camera footage. Which of those would you like to start with?" Patricia interjected from behind Shaw's shoulder, and her timing was impeccable. "He's been very hostile with me this whole time. I was frightened. I am still frightened." She looked at the growing ring of onlookers when she said it, not at Shaw, at the crowd. Shaw turned to Marcus again, and there was something in his bearing now. A slight hardening, the posture of a man who had committed to a position and was now investing energy in defending it rather than evaluating it. "Can you provide documentation for this bag?" "Yes," Marcus said. "My boarding pass, my passport, and the combination to the lock. I'd also refer you to the luggage tag, which has my bag tag number, which will correspond to the carrier manifest for Flight 771 from London." "Show me the boarding pass." Marcus reached into his breast pocket, and Shaw's hand went up. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus stopped. He looked at his own hand halfway into his own pocket, then looked at Shaw. There was a pause, not long, 2 seconds, maybe 3, but in those 2 seconds, something happened in Marcus Abels that no one watching could see. A door closing quietly on the version of this interaction that ended differently. He understood now with complete and devastating clarity that he was no longer in a negotiation. He was in an outcome that had already been decided, and the only variable still in play was how far it went. He lowered his hand. "Officer Shaw," he said, and his voice had changed slightly. Not louder, not softer, but weighted differently, each syllable landing with a deliberateness that made the surrounding noise seem quieter. "I want you to understand something. I am going to be detained tonight for retrieving my own property. That is what is happening right now. And when that process concludes, everything that follows from this moment forward will be your responsibility." Shaw stared at him. "Is that a threat?" "It's a forecast," Marcus said. At the edge of the crowd, Kyle Reyes stood with his radio half raised. He was looking at the case, specifically at the titanium handle, the way the light caught the brushed metal, the quality of it. He was looking at the carousel where the belt was still cycling past unclaimed bags. He was looking for Patricia Hollis's bag, which he realized he had not seen anyone point to, or describe, or retrieve. He moved his radio slightly higher, then stopped. Shaw was already talking. Supervisor Carol Weston was not a bad person. She had 22 years in airport administration, had processed thousands of baggage disputes, lost property claims, and the occasional legitimate theft accusation. And she had a decent internal compass for when a situation was what it appeared to be, and when it was something else. Her compass was reading uncertain right now. She moved past Shaw and crouched slightly to look at the luggage tag herself. The plastic sleeve was cracked, the information card half displaced, but she could make out the shape of letters. The beginning of a last name, she thought. The tag number printed at the bottom was partially visible. She stood, She looked at the bag. She looked at Patricia, who had arranged herself behind Shaw's shoulder with an expression of patient, pained trust. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression that was not pleading and not angry, but was very intent. "Sir," she said, and she tried to put something conciliatory in her voice. "If you can give us the combination to the lock, we can verify the contents." "The contents are proprietary corporate hardware," Marcus said. "I'm not opening a case containing classified business materials in the middle of a public terminal. If you want to verify ownership, check the carrier manifest with American Airlines for Flight 771. My name, Marcus Abels, will be listed as the owner of this bag with bag tag number corresponding to this case." Patricia moved slightly. Her timing was deliberate. "He's stalling. He just needs to open it. Why won't he open it if it's his?" Weston looked at Patricia, looked at Marcus, looked at the carousel. She did not look at Kyle Reyes. And she did not ask, "Where is your bag, Ms. Hollis?" That question, the most obvious question, the one that would have unraveled everything in under 60 seconds, sat unasked. Later, in a gray concrete room, she would not be able to explain why she hadn't asked it. She would try. She would fail. "We're going to need to take this to the security office," she said, and she heard in her own voice the sound of a person selecting the path of least resistance, dressed up as procedure. "Sir, if you'll come with us." "Am I being detained?" Marcus said. "We'd like you to come voluntarily." "I won't come voluntarily. If you have grounds to detain me, state them. If you don't, I'm leaving this terminal with my bag." Shaw stepped forward. He had been waiting for this. "Detaining you for suspected theft. Come with us." It was at that precise moment that Kyle Reyes opened his mouth. Shaw. His voice was careful, measured, a young man navigating a very specific kind of professional minefield. "Maybe we should pull the carousel footage before we—" "Reyes." Shaw did not look at him. "Back up." Kyle Reyes closed his mouth. He took one step back as instructed. He did not look away. Isabella Vega had not lowered her phone once. She had been filming for 4 minutes and 38 seconds. She had captured Patricia's grip on the handle, the damaged tag, Shaw's arrival, and the entire exchange that followed. She had not said a single word out loud during any of it, just held the frame steady, let the sound come in clean, let the picture speak without editorial. Now she spoke. "Excuse me." Her voice was clear and firm, cutting through the murmur of the crowd, without aggression, the way someone speaks when they are confident in what they are about to say. "I've been filming since this started. He didn't snatch that bag. He lifted it off the belt, and she ran at him from the other side of the carousel." Shaw turned to look at her. "Ma'am, please step back." "I'm a travel journalist," Isabella said. She turned the screen of her phone toward him without lowering it. 1,147 people watching. "And this is running live, right now. So, however you'd like to proceed, I'd recommend being very specific about your reasoning." Shaw stared at the screen, then at Isabella. "Turn that off." "I will not," Isabella said, and she said it without volume or ceremony, the way someone declines something that was never seriously being offered as an option. From the back of the crowd, Thomas Greer moved forward. He moved the way men move when they have decided something. Not fast, not with visible anger, but with the purposeful economy of motion that says the decision has already been made, and the movement is simply its execution. He was 63 years old and wore the look of a person who had spent decades at tables where things were decided, and had learned to tell the difference between what was right and what was convenient. "Officer," he said, and his voice had the unhurried authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I've been standing here since before the bag came off the belt. I watched this entire exchange from the beginning. That man," he gestured to Marcus, "was holding that case before that woman reached him. She came from the far side of the carousel. I watched her come from the far side." "Sir, this doesn't involve you," Shaw said. "I've been flying out of this airport for 11 years, Thomas said. "Twice a month. I've watched a lot of things in this terminal." He looked at Weston rather than Shaw. "What I am telling you is that I watched this from the start, and what I watched does not match what she is saying." Weston said nothing, but something shifted very slightly in her expression, a barely perceptible tightening around the eyes, the face of a person processing information they would have preferred not to receive. Shaw was done with the conversation at the carousel. He turned to Marcus and unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. Kyle Reyes, standing at the edge of the scene, watched this happen. He looked at the carousel. He looked at Patricia Hollis, who was looking at Shaw with soft, relieved eyes. He looked at the belt, still cycling. He still could not find Patricia Hollis's bag anywhere on it. He picked up his radio. He held it for a moment. He put it back. He would think about that decision for a long time afterward. Isabella Vega had been making travel content for 4 years, and in that time she had filmed monsoons in Borneo, a volcanic eruption in Iceland from a respectful distance, and a customs officer in Budapest who had confiscated her camera bag and then returned it with a formal apology 40 minutes later when her credentials cleared. She was not easily rattled, and she was not easily silenced, and she had the instinct, refined through years of pointing a lens at the world and asking it to be honest, for when something was happening that needed to be seen. She had that instinct now. Her phone was held at shoulder height, the frame steady, the audio picking up clean. She had switched the live stream caption 2 minutes into the confrontation from the generic Terminal 3 vibes she had been planning to the simple, unambiguous text, "This is happening right now at O'Hare Terminal 3, Carousel 6. Watch." The counter had moved from 67 to 300 to 1,147 and was still climbing, tick by tick, accelerating. The comments were coming in the way comments came when something real was unfolding in front of people who had not had the option to curate it fast and raw and without the distance that editing allowed. That handle is custom. That's not standard Remova hardware. Look at it. She came from the other side of the belt. You can see it. She wasn't even on his side. He hasn't raised his voice once. Not once. Someone please call a lawyer for this man. Where is her bag? Isabella read the comments as they came in, and the last one landed differently than the others. She lowered the camera just slightly and scanned the carousel. The belt was still moving. Bags were still cycling past. A generic black roller suitcase, a hard-shell purple carry-on that someone had abandoned, a scuffed khaki duffel. Nothing that matched what Patricia Hollis was describing. Nothing that looked like it had ever belonged to the woman in the beige coat. Isabella brought the camera back up and began following at a careful distance as Shaw directed Marcus toward the security corridor. She kept the frame steady. She did not run. She did not narrate. She let the image do what images do when they are not crowded by the voice of the person holding the camera. The live stream counter passed 2,000. Thomas Greer watched Shaw and Marcus disappear through the security corridor door, and then he turned to Supervisor Carol Weston, who had followed them part way and stopped. He approached her at a measured pace. "Supervisor," he said, "I want to make a formal statement." Weston turned. "Sir, we'll take statements at the appropriate time." "The appropriate time," Thomas said, "is now, before anything else happens in that room." He held eye contact, not aggressively, but with the patient firmness of a person who was not going to be managed away from this. "I'm Thomas Greer. I'm a Chicago resident. I have been in this terminal for the past 22 minutes waiting for a bag from Flight 771. I was standing approximately 30 feet from Carousel 6 when the bag that man was carrying came off the belt." Weston said nothing. She was listening. He was standing to the left of the carousel mouth. He stepped forward when the bag appeared, lifted it, extended the handle, and turned to leave. The woman who was accusing him of theft was not on his side of the carousel. She came around the far end of the belt from the right side. She did not lift any bag. She ran at him after he already had it. Weston was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Greer, these situations can be difficult to interpret in the moment," Supervisor Thomas said, and now there was something in his voice that was quieter and less patient than before. "Where is her bag?" Weston blinked. "She says she checked a bag in London. She says it's the one that man is carrying. So if it's the one he's carrying..." Thomas turned and looked at the carousel still cycling, unclaimed luggage still orbiting past. "Then where is her bag?" The question stood between them like a piece of furniture that had always been there, and neither of them had thought to look at. Weston looked at the carousel. She looked at it for a long moment, long enough that it stopped being a casual glance, and became something closer to reckoning. "I'll look into it," she said, and the phrase had the particular hollow sound of a commitment that has not yet decided whether it intends to be kept. Thomas Greer said nothing in response. He looked at the belt for another moment, watching the bags orbit past, and then he took out his phone. Junior Officer Kyle Reyes stood near the entrance to the security corridor and turned the situation over in his head the way you turn a coin over when you can't decide which side to call. 8 months. He had been in this job 8 months. Long enough to know the hierarchy of decision-making and exactly what it cost a junior officer to push against it. Long enough to know that Shaw was not a person who received disagreement well, especially in the field, especially in front of a crowd. Long enough to understand that his job was to support the senior officer on scene and build his case through proper channels later if he disagreed. Long enough to know that proper channels later sometimes meant never. He looked at the security corridor door. He looked at the carousel. He looked at Patricia Hollis, who was standing with a junior airline customer service representative, describing something with a controlled, grateful energy that looked very little like the grief of a woman whose medication was missing, and very much like the relief of a woman whose plan was proceeding on schedule. He looked for her bag. He could not find it. He picked up his notepad from his breast pocket, a small, spiral-bound thing he carried for observations he thought might matter later, and he began writing. He wrote the timestamp. He wrote what he had seen from his position near the rope divider. He wrote the direction Patricia Hollis had come from. He wrote that he had not seen her bag at any point. He wrote it small and careful and complete the handwriting of someone who was not sure anyone would read it, but was not willing to risk being wrong about that. At 11:41 p.m., 18 minutes after Isabella Vega had started her stream, a clip of the first 90 seconds of footage, Patricia's grip on the handle, the damaged tag, Shaw's arrival, was extracted and posted separately on a major social media platform by a user who covered civil rights stories. The caption read, "O'Hare Security just handcuffed a man for picking up his own bag. A woman who came from the other side of the carousel is the accuser. Look at the handle on that suitcase. That's custom titanium. Does this look like a bag thief to you?" By the time Marcus Abels was sitting in the gray concrete holding room with a steel cuff around his right wrist, that post had 41,000 views. By the time Raymond Cross answered his phone, it had crossed 80,000. And by the time 3 black Lincoln Navigators were pulling out of a downtown Chicago parking structure into a wet November night, a legal commentator with 600,000 followers had reposted the clip with a single line of text that read, "Whoever this man is, I hope he has a very, very good attorney." He did. "Put both hands behind your back," Shaw said. Marcus looked at him for one beat, not with anger, not with surprise, but with the particular focus of a person encoding something into long-term memory. And then he spoke before he moved. "I am placing my hands behind my back voluntarily. I am not resisting. I am complying under protest, and I want that language reflected in whatever documentation comes from this interaction," noted Shaw said with the tone of a man who had not noted it. Marcus brought his arms behind him slowly, each movement deliberate and visible, nothing sudden, nothing that could be described later as a lunge or a flinch or a threat. He had thought about this, not tonight specifically, but in the generalized way that black men who move through the world with any degree of visibility think about it. How to be clearly, legibly, undeniably non-threatening in the moments when someone has decided to find a threat. How to make your body speak a language of cooperation so fluent and precise that it removed every justification except the one that had been there from the start. He put his hands behind his back and stood still. The handcuffs went on. Shaw ratcheted them too tight. Whether this was habit or intentional would later be a matter of formal documentation, but in the moment it was immediate. The bite of the steel edge into the skin above his wrist bones, the slight restriction of blood flow, the dull, pressing ache that started at once and would leave marks that a paralegal would photograph carefully in a gray concrete room in approximately 40 minutes. Marcus did not wince. His face did not change. Weston took the Remova case from where it sat on the floor and handed it to a junior airport staffer who had appeared at the perimeter of the situation. "Bring this to the security office," she said. The young man lifted it and looked at it the way people look at something expensive that they haven't been told to be careful with. Shaw put his hand on Marcus's shoulder, not gently, and pointed him toward the security corridor. Walk. The walk from Carousel 6 to the Terminal 3 security corridor took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Marcus counted. He counted because counting was something to do with his mind during the 4 minutes and 17 seconds of walking through a public terminal with his hands cuffed behind his back in a charcoal overcoat and polished Oxfords, past the faces of 300 tired travelers at 11:27 in the evening on a November Wednesday. The faces. He did not look at them directly. He kept his eyes forward at the middle distance at the exit signs and the gate markers and the scuffed floor tiles passing under his feet. But peripheral vision is remarkably accurate under the kind of hyper-awareness that adrenaline produces, and he saw enough. A woman near the American Airlines desk with a toddler on her hip who watched him walk by and pressed the child's face gently against her shoulder so he wouldn't see. The small, unconscious protectiveness of it. Not directed at Marcus, directed at the site itself. A man in a business suit who had his phone out and was filming his arm almost casual, the phone barely raised. Whether he was filming for sympathy or for confirmation of something he had already decided, Marcus couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. A young airline employee behind the counter, mid-20s, her name tag said Carla, who looked up as Marcus passed, made eye contact by accident and immediately looked down at the counter. Not because she was complicit, because she couldn't bear it and didn't know what to do with that. And Thomas Greer. Thomas Greer was standing at the side of the main corridor about halfway to the security door, not against the wall but in the open space between the counter and the foot traffic, as if he had positioned himself there deliberately. He held his jacket over one arm. He was not filming. He was not speaking to anyone around him. He was simply standing there in the open watching Marcus walk. When Marcus came parallel with him, Thomas did not look away. He did not look down. He did not offer sympathy with his expression. He did not let his face collapse into the concerned softness that people offered as a substitute for action. He just looked at Marcus steadily, with the full direct attention of a person bearing witness, and he gave a single small, deliberate nod. Not pity, recognition. Marcus did not nod back. He did not slow. But something in the line of his shoulders changed by a degree too small to measure and too significant to miss. He kept walking. Behind him, Isabella Vega followed at a distance of about 20 feet, her phone at her side. The stream still running. She had not commented once since Marcus was cuffed. She had simply kept the camera level and let what was happening speak without her voice getting in the way. The live stream counter had passed 9,000 viewers. A comment surfaced and rose to the top of the chat, pushed there by hundreds of people agreeing with it in real time. He walks like he knows something they don't. The walk took 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and Marcus spent most of them doing something that looked from the outside like absolute composure, and was from the inside something closer to controlled velocity. He was thinking. Shaw had not read him his Miranda rights. At no point, from the moment he said, "detaining you for suspected theft," to the moment the cuffs went on, had Miranda rights been read. This was not an oversight Marcus intended to let remain unaddressed. This was the first brick in a wall he was already building. The luggage tag. Patricia's grip had damaged it, had displaced the information card inside the clear sleeve, had made the printed name illegible to a casual glance. But the tag itself was still attached. The bag tag number, 7749-ABLS, was still there, partially visible at the bottom of the sleeve, enough for someone who was looking for it rather than confirming an assumption. The airline manifest for Flight 771 would match that number to his name. That was not a maybe. That was a certainty. The camera above Carousel 6. Shaw had said, "I'll be the one deciding what we need to look at," which told Marcus everything he needed to know about whether Shaw intended to look at it. But cameras did not require Shaw's permission to have recorded what they recorded. The footage existed. It was a fact that existed independent of Derek Shaw's preferences. The case itself. The foam lining, navy blue custom singular. The server rack with Vertex Shields logo machined into the casing. The contract documents. 3 suits folded in tissue. a first edition book with a handwritten inscription on the title page. The interior of that case was a biography in objects. No one who opened it without knowing what was inside would conclude they were looking at a stolen bag. He had everything he needed. He needed one more thing: his phone. Shaw had taken it when the cuffs went on. Standard procedure transferred to the evidence bag that the junior staffer was carrying along with the Remova case. But Marcus had Fourth Amendment rights, and he had the right to counsel. And if Weston had any sense at all, she would give him the phone before the situation accelerated further. If she didn't, he would demand it. He would be calm about it. He would be precise about it. He would be absolutely immovable about it. The security corridor door opened ahead of him. Gray light, concrete walls, the smell of stale coffee. He walked through. The last thing he thought before the door closed behind him was not about the case, or the footage, or the manifest. It was about the number near the very top of his contacts list. Raymond, emergency. 23 characters. The most important 23 characters in his phone. He was going to need them. He walked through that terminal like a man who already knew how the story ended. Because he did. The security holding room in Terminal 3 was 12 feet by 9 feet, and every one of its dimensions communicated the same thing. This space was not designed for comfort or dignity or any prolonged interaction that required either. It was designed for brief, pressured encounters that resolved quickly in one of two directions: confession or escalation. And it was designed to make both of those outcomes feel inevitable. The walls were painted a shade of gray that had no official name but could only be described as institutional. The specific colorlessness that governments and bureaucracies apply to surfaces when they have decided that comfort is not a priority. The floor was the same beige linoleum as the terminal, but scrubbed to a dull rather than reflective finish. The ceiling light was a single large fluorescent panel that buzzed at a frequency just below conscious detection, but above the threshold of comfort. The table was metal and bolted to the floor. The chairs were metal and bolted to each other and to a ring set in the floor under the table. Shaw brought Marcus in and directed him into the chair facing the door, then secured the right cuff to the steel ring on the table. One cuff attached, the other free. The left hand available, but the right wrist anchored to the table with the particular combination of physical restriction and symbolic finality that the gesture was intended to convey. Marcus settled into the chair with the posture of a person choosing to sit down rather than having been placed. He rested his free hand on the table. He looked at the room. Weston entered a moment later, followed by the junior staffer carrying the Remova case, which he set on the table with slightly less care than the situation warranted. Weston positioned herself against the far wall, arms crossed the stance of someone who had not yet decided exactly what role they were playing in this scene. "This can be simple," Shaw said. He was standing feet apart, hands on the table's edge, using his physical advantage of being upright while Marcus was seated. The geometry of interrogation classic and deliberate. "Give us the combination. We open it. Either it has her things inside, or it doesn't, and one of you has a very different night than the other. 5 minutes. Done." Marcus looked at Shaw with the kind of attention that was not hostility and not deference, but something closer to documentation. He looked at him the way you look at a process you are recording for later reference. "You did not read me my Miranda rights," Marcus said. Shaw's expression tightened by a fraction. "This isn't that kind of situation. Officer Shaw." Marcus's voice was even unhurried. "You have handcuffed me to a table. My liberty is restricted. You are questioning me about alleged criminal activity. What aspect of this situation suggests Miranda rights are not applicable?" Shaw looked at Weston. Weston said nothing, but something in her posture shifted by a degree. The slight stiffening of someone who has just heard a fact they were hoping not to hear. Shaw tried a different angle. He sat down across from Marcus and softened his approach in the way of someone shifting tactics rather than genuinely relaxing. "Look, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of situations that looked complicated that were actually pretty straightforward. This woman knows exactly what's in that bag. She described the brand, the color. She described a black Rimowa," Marcus said. "There were 11 black Rimowa cases on that carousel tonight. I know because I watched the belt for 14 minutes while I waited for mine. She was very convincing, Shaw said. I'm certain she was, Marcus replied. That doesn't make her accurate. Shaw leaned forward. The longer you stonewall, the worse this gets for you. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Just look the way you look at something you have decided not to argue with, because arguing would grant it a legitimacy it hasn't earned. Then he said, You haven't charged me with anything. You don't have a warrant to search my property. The woman who made this accusation has not produced her own bag, her boarding pass, or her luggage receipt. You are holding me on the word of a person who arrived at this table with nothing but her insistence. He paused. I want my phone. I have the right to legal counsel. Weston pushed herself off the wall. She looked at Shaw. He's right, Derek. Shaw looked at her with the expression of a man who had been hoping she would continue to say nothing. He's in custody, Weston said. We have to give him the phone. Shaw's jaw worked for a moment. Then he dug into the evidence bag, found the phone, and put it on the table. Not handed it across, put it down with the deliberate disinvestment of someone conceding a point they don't intend to concede again. Call a public defender, Shaw said. See where that gets you. Marcus looked at the phone. He picked it up with his free left hand, and he felt something he had been maintaining very carefully for the past 41 minutes begin to relax. Not collapse, not release entirely, but ease the way the muscles of a person holding something very heavy ease very slightly when they know relief is 30 seconds away. He opened his contacts. He scrolled. Raymond, emergency. He pressed call. It rang twice. Marcus, the voice said. The voice that answered was smooth, precise, and contained the particular quality of alertness that belonged to people whose professional lives required them to be genuinely available at any hour. Raymond Cross was 58 years old and had been the senior managing partner of Cross, Navarro and Associates for 14 years. He had argued cases before the Seventh Circuit. He had deposed senators. He had, on 2 separate occasions, made city governments rewrite policies rather than face what he had assembled against them. He slept lightly. It's nearly midnight. This better be worth it, Raymond. Marcus kept his voice at the same volume he had maintained all night. Not low from fear, not raised from urgency, but calibrated for the specific purpose of being heard by the person on the other end. I'm in a holding cell at O'Hare Terminal 3, handcuffed to a table. 3 seconds of silence. In those 3 seconds, Raymond Cross stood up from the leather chair in his 47th floor office overlooking Lake Michigan, and the quality of the silence changed from the absence of speech to the presence of someone already thinking. Are you injured? Bruised wrists. The cuffs were applied too tightly. Have they charged you? Grand theft. My own luggage. Miranda writes. Not Reed. Names of the arresting officers. Shaw. Derek Shaw. Supervisor is Carol Weston. Complaining witness. A woman named Patricia Hollis. Naperville. A pause. Shorter than the first one, but with more weight in it. I know that name, Raymond said. Marcus stayed very still. Excuse me. Sit tight. Raymond's voice had shifted again. The conversational warmth that had been in it even at midnight had been replaced by something cleaner, colder, and considerably more efficient. Do not say anything further to the officers in that room. Not about the weather. Not if they offer you water. Not if Shaw says something specifically designed to provoke a response. Nothing. I'm sending Diana ahead. We'll be there in 22 minutes. Raymond, 22 minutes. And there was something in his voice then. Not softness exactly, but a human frequency beneath the professional register. The voice of a man who had known Marcus Abels for 6 years and understood the weight of what this night meant that had nothing to do with the legal mechanics. Close your eyes if you want. Rest. You've had a long flight. The call ended. Marcus set the phone face down on the table. He looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed. Shaw had watched the entire call from across the room with the expression of a man who was trying to gauge threat level from tone and body language alone, since he couldn't hear the other side. What did the lawyer say, he asked, and there was something in his voice that he probably intended as casual and landed as anxious. Tell you to take a plea. Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at Shaw. He told me you have 22 minutes, Marcus said. Shaw laughed, a short, hard sound. 22 minutes to what? Marcus did not answer this either. The laugh faded. Shaw's foot shifted on the linoleum, the squeak of rubber sole against dull floor, the only sound in the room for a moment. He went back to pacing. The perimeter of the small space, the same circuit he had been walking since they arrived, his body burning off the discomfort that his brain was not willing to name. Weston stood at the wall and looked at the Remova case on the table. The titanium handle caught the ceiling light and held it, a clean, precise glint that repeated every time her eyes landed on it. She looked at it the way you look at something you have been told to believe is ordinary, but that keeps insisting on being interesting. She looked at Marcus. He was sitting with his eyes closed, now his free hand resting flat on the table, his breathing slow and measured and deliberate, the breathing of someone who had chosen stillness rather than fallen into it. She had processed a lot of people in this room. Guilty people were many things: nervous, angry, calculating, cooperative, theatrical. They bargained, they shifted, they watched the door. They did not meditate. A thought formed in the back of Weston's mind, and she did not want it, but it arrived anyway, cold and inevitable. What if we are wrong? In that gray concrete room, Marcus Abels sat with a steel cuff on his wrist and 22 minutes on the clock. And he sat without falling apart, without begging, without breaking the silence that Shaw kept trying to fill. Where did that come from? How does a man find that stillness in the worst moment of his night? The answer goes all the way back. To a 17-year-old in Cleveland, to a 26-year-old in San Francisco, to a 31-year-old in Washington, D.C., to 3 moments that didn't break Marcus Abels. They built him. Before we go any further, if this story is making you feel something right now, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that dignity doesn't have a dress code. Subscribe so you don't miss the rest, because what Raymond Cross is about to walk into that terminal and do, nobody in that building is ever going to forget it. Marcus Abels was 17 years old and 2 months into his first real job when the lesson arrived that would shape everything that followed. The job was at a mid-size electronics store in Cleveland. Not the glamorous kind of after-school employment, but the kind that paid $8.25 an hour and required a red polo shirt with the store logo over the left breast and the willingness to stand for 6-hour stretches on concrete floors. He had been hired because he was good with the equipment, because he could explain the difference between 2 television models to a confused customer without making them feel stupid, and because the hiring manager, a decent man named Mr. Kowalski, had looked at Marcus's face in the interview and decided to extend the offer without additional deliberation. Marcus had been doing exactly that, explaining the difference between 2 television models to an elderly woman who was buying one for her grandson, when the complaint was made. He did not see it happen. He was told about it afterward. A man, late 40s, sport coat, impatient in the way of someone who considered their time uniquely valuable, had approached a security guard near the front of the store and said that he had been followed around the electronics department by one of the employees and found it threatening. He pointed. The employee he pointed to was Marcus. The security guard had not asked questions. The security guard had come to Marcus, interrupted his conversation with the elderly woman, and asked him to come to the back. The back room was small and lit by a single overhead bulb. The store manager, not Mr. Kowalski, who wasn't in that day, but his deputy, a man Marcus did not know well, had asked Marcus to empty his pockets. Marcus had emptied them. Work phone, personal phone, a pack of gum, his employee lanyard. Nothing else. Nothing that had not been his when the shift started. The manager looked at the contents of his pockets laid out on the folding table, looked at Marcus and said, "You can go back to work." Not "I'm sorry," not "this was clearly a mistake," not even the acknowledgement that what had just happened should not have happened. Just, "You can go back to work." Marcus went back to the floor. He finished helping the elderly woman with the televisions. He helped 3 more customers after that. He stood at the cash register for the last 40 minutes of his shift, and he did not say anything to anyone about what had happened in the back room. He rode the bus home at 9:15, and in the back of the bus, in the specific privacy of a public space where no one was watching him, he opened the small notebook he kept in his backpack, and he wrote a single sentence. The only answer to being underestimated is being undeniable. He did not know at 17 that this sentence was the foundation of a company. He did not know it would be printed in white text on the wall of an office building 15 years later, visible through the glass from the elevator lobby. He did not know it was the reason he would not, on a night some years from now, lose his composure in a gray concrete room at O'Hare International Airport. He just knew it was true. That night didn't break him. It gave him a blueprint. He had been running Vertex Shield for 8 months when he flew to San Francisco to meet with potential investors. The company had 4 employees, 1 client, and enough runway for approximately 5 more months. Marcus had spent 3 of those 8 months building the product and 5 of them building the case for why someone with money should give him more of it. The pitch deck was on his laptop. The laptop was in his backpack. The backpack was on his shoulder when he walked into the airport departure lounge at San Francisco International and headed toward the business class section where his ticket entitled him to sit. He was wearing the suit he had worn to the meetings, the one good suit he owned at the time, which he had bought at a department store sale 2 years earlier, which fit well enough in the shoulders and slightly less well everywhere else. He was carrying a rolling suitcase that had a small crack in the outer shell from where it had been dropped by a baggage handler in Charlotte the previous year. He found an open chair in the business class lounge and sat down. A member of the lounge staff, young professional completely comfortable in her uniform, approached him within 45 seconds. "Sir, this area is reserved for our premium members. Could I see your boarding pass?" Marcus had it out before she finished the sentence. Business class, his name, the flight number, the date, everything in order. She took it. She looked at it. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the suit that didn't quite fit in the elbows, at the rolling suitcase with the cracked shell, at the backpack that held the laptop, that held the pitch deck, that represented everything he was currently trying to build. "I'm sorry," she said. "There may have been a check-in error. Let me just confirm this with my supervisor." She walked away with his boarding pass. 4 other passengers entered the lounge while she was gone. None of them were asked to wait. The supervisor confirmed the ticket in 3 minutes. She handed it back to the staff member who brought it back to Marcus. "Of course, sir. You're welcome to have a seat." No apology, no acknowledgement. The matter was closed. Marcus sat in the lounge for 47 minutes and drank a coffee he didn't particularly want. And in those 47 minutes, he drafted the complete structure of what would become Vertex Shield's Series A fundraising strategy. The strategy that 18 months later returned $12 million in new investment from 3 different sources. He had needed something to do with the feeling, and he had learned by then that the most efficient thing to do with it was work. Shame didn't live in Marcus Abels. It visited, and then he put it to work. 5 years before the night at O'Hare, Marcus Abels was 31 years old, and Vertex Shield had just signed its first contract with a federal agency. He flew to Washington, D.C. for the signing and flew back the same day, which meant he arrived at Reagan National with his laptop, a folder of now signed documents classified at a level that required specific handling protocols, and the particular exhausted clarity of someone who has just watched something they spent years building become real. He was in the security line when his badge flagged. Not his ID, his federal contractor badge, which was supposed to expedite his screening. Instead, it triggered an alert in the system, the kind that happened occasionally due to database synchronization delays that the agency had warned him might occur during the first 30 days of the contract. He knew this. He had been briefed on it. He was not alarmed. But the agents didn't know that, and when the badge flagged, they pulled him out of the line and into a separate screening area, which was a low partition in the main security zone. Not a private room, just a partitioned space visible to the entire queue, where they asked him to open his bag. He opened it. They saw the laptop. They saw the folder. "What is this?" The agent who asked it was 20-something Ernest, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. "Why does it say classified?" "Because it is classified," Marcus said. "I have clearance level 3. My contractor badge is in my left breast pocket." The agent retrieved the badge. He looked at it. He looked at a colleague. He called a supervisor. The supervisor called someone else. 23 minutes passed in the partitioned area while Marcus stood with his bag open on the table in full view of a security line that moved past him slowly. 100 people watching a man with a classified folder and an expression that gave away nothing being verified by a process that was taking much longer than it should have. It resolved correctly. Of course it did. The badge was valid, the clearance was valid, the documents were legal. The entire thing had been a database delay exactly as predicted. Nobody apologized. Marcus collected his bag and walked to his gate. He sat down. He looked out the window at the planes on the tarmac, at the ground crews moving in their orange vests, at the gray November sky above D.C. pressing low against everything. He thought for a while, and then he took out his phone and scrolled to a contact he had added 6 months earlier at the recommendation of a colleague who had described the man as the kind of attorney you pay to never need, which means he's the kind you'll need exactly once and be glad you have. He moved the contact to the top of his list. He renamed it Raymond, emergency. He put his phone in his pocket and boarded his plane. So now, sitting in a gray room with steel around his wrist, Marcus Abels was not afraid. He was patient. There is a very specific kind of stillness that only comes from having been through the fire before, and having built something stronger in the aftermath. He closed his eyes. 22 minutes. The office of Raymond Cross occupied the corner of the 47th floor of a glass tower on North Michigan Avenue, and at 11:49 on a Wednesday night, it was lit only by the reading lamp on his desk, and the ambient glow of the Chicago skyline pressing in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Michigan was invisible in the dark, but present. The particular quality of the air in that building always carried something from the water, even in November, even at midnight. Raymond was reading a brief. He read briefs the way surgeons read procedure notes, with complete attention and no acceleration. The kind of focus that missed nothing and weighted everything appropriately before moving on to the next sentence. He had 3 cases in active preparation and 2 appeals in final review, and a retainer roster that read like a cross-section of Chicago's most consequential institutions. And he read briefs at 11:49 p.m. because the work did not stop simply because the day did. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Marcus Abels. He answered on the second ring. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, Raymond Cross set the phone on the desk and sat very still for exactly 5 seconds. The time it took to complete the transition from reading a brief to preparing for something considerably more immediate. He picked up the phone again and called Diana Solis. She answered before the first ring finished, which told him she was still working. Diana, mobilize. O'Hare Terminal 3. Marcus Abels is in a holding cell. A pause that lasted less than 1 second. The duration of Diana Solis processing the fact and beginning to act on it simultaneously. What happened? Unlawful detention, racial profiling. Arresting officer is a Shaw, Derek Shaw. Supervisor Weston. Miranda rights were not read at the time of detention. Physical condition. Bruised wrists. Cuffs too tight. Will need documentation before anything else. Understood. The complaining witness. Patricia Hollis, Naperville. The pause this time was slightly longer. Raymond heard the sound of rapid keyboard input. Then, Raymond. I know. She has a pattern. I know. Pull everything. Bring it all. He was already on his feet, already moving toward the coat rack by the door. Call both investigators. I want carousel footage from camera 6C pulled and in your hands before we walk into that building. And get the American Airlines manifest for Flight 771 from London tonight. Done, Diana said, and she was already gone. Diana Solis, 38 years old, pulled together a case the way other people pulled together furniture, with complete attention to load-bearing structure. Nothing ornamental included, nothing structural left out. She had 11 minutes before the cars arrived. She used them. The Patricia Hollis file took 4 minutes to assemble from the firm's database. 3 prior incidents, all airline-related, all involving disputed baggage. 2 of them resulting in out-of-court settlements under non-disclosure agreements that were, Diana noted, very carefully worded to restrict disclosure without explicitly admitting the claims were fraudulent. A pattern that looked to anyone who knew how to read it less like a run of bad luck and more like a business model. She flagged the file, printed the key documents, and added them to the leather briefcase that she kept ready. Not dramatically, not with movie prop significance, but with the practical preparedness of someone who had learned that the difference between a good case and a decisive one was usually the first 20 minutes. She called the 2 private investigators on retainer O'Hare Terminal 3. "I need footage from camera 6C Carousel 6, last 60 minutes. And I need the American Airlines checked baggage manifest for Flight 771 from Heathrow tonight. Get to the security hub before anyone thinks to pull that footage for different reasons." She put her trench coat on. She picked up the briefcase. She walked to the elevator. In the lobby, the cars were already there. The 3 Lincoln Navigators moved through the wet Chicago streets in a loose formation. Not dramatic, not urgent in a visible way, but efficient in the way of vehicles whose drivers had been given a destination and a time frame and understood both. In the lead car, Raymond Cross had his reading glasses off and his legal pad open, writing in the cramped private shorthand of a man taking notes that no one else would be able to read, and no one else needed to. He was building the sequence of events in the order they had occurred, noting the specific violations as distinct and documentable facts rather than as a general grievance. This distinction mattered. It always mattered. Outrage was one thing, specificity one. In the second car, Diana Solis was reading the Patricia Hollis file by the glow of the car's overhead reading light, her finger moving down the page with the focused attention of someone who was not reading for general understanding, but for the specific detail that would be most useful in the next 40 minutes. She found it on page 3. A notation in the margin of the Denver incident from 2019 written by the claims adjuster who had handled it. Witness accounts inconsistent with complainant's timeline. Bag appeared on carousel 11 minutes after incident began. Complainant did not retrieve it immediately. She photographed the notation with her phone. She sent it to Raymond. And in a security office in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the phone of Captain James Ford rang. The number on the screen was an office number he recognized because it was one of approximately 4 numbers in the city of Chicago whose calls he was required to answer, regardless of the hour. He stared at it for 2 seconds, calculating what the call was likely to be about, arriving at a conclusion that made his stomach perform a specific and unpleasant maneuver. He answered. The voice on the other end was clipped professional and moving fast. Someone in the mayor's office. The mayor's office had seen Isabella Vega's live stream, 83,000 views at the time of the call. Someone on the mayor's staff had recognized the name Vertex Shield because Vertex Shield had a contract with the city of Chicago for network security services, and that contract had a renewal meeting scheduled in 11 days, and the situation of the city's contracted company having one of their executives handcuffed in a terminal for picking up his own bag was not a category of problem that anyone in that office wanted to be managing at 11:52 p.m. Ford set the phone down. He looked at the door of the security holding room at the end of the corridor. He stood up, put his jacket on, and walked toward it with the slightly too rapid pace of a man trying not to look like he was moving as fast as he was. The 3 Lincoln Navigators did not pull into the arrivals lane. The arrivals lane was for people who were arriving. Raymond Cross was not arriving. He was responding, which was a different kind of motion entirely, and the driver of the lead vehicle understood this because he had made this specific kind of run before. Not often, but enough, and he bypassed the concrete traffic barricades and pulled directly onto the restricted curb designated for law enforcement and emergency response. The engines cut almost simultaneously. The doors opened. Raymond Cross stepped onto the wet pavement of O'Hare's Terminal 3 exterior and stood for exactly 1 second in the drizzling rain, looking at the glass face of the building in front of him. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, and his silver hair was immaculate, despite the late hour and the weather, because Raymond Cross had spent 30 years being the person who walked into rooms that other people were already off balance in, and he had learned that how you looked when you entered was the first sentence of the argument. Diana Solis was at his left shoulder, her trench coat draped and her briefcase in her right hand, already looking at her tablet with the focused stillness of someone reviewing materials, rather than looking impressive. Behind them, the 2 private investigators and 2 paralegals moved in a loose formation, not theatrical, not aggressive, but purposeful in the specific way of a team that had operated together before and didn't need to discuss their formation. They walked through the sliding doors. Captain James Ford was waiting inside the entrance, and everything about his posture communicated the particular misery of a senior official who has been overtaken by events he did not generate, and now must manage with the tools of a person who arrived late. He was sweating slightly at the temples. He held a handkerchief that had been used recently. His jacket was buttoned too quickly. "Mr. Cross," he said, and he held his hands up with the palms forward in the universal gesture of a man who wants the first thing said to be that he is trying. "I want to assure you that this department takes this kind of situation extremely seriously," Captain Ford Raymond said, and he did not stop walking. Ford had to turn and move beside him or be left at the entrance. He chose to move beside him. "Do not speak to me about what your department takes seriously. Speak to me about what your officers did." Ford fell into step, his slightly heavier build requiring a small extra effort to keep pace. We had a complaining witness who provided a specific description. Patricia Hollis Diana Solis said in the tone of a person reading a label. 57 years old, Naperville. 3 prior incidents of fraudulent property claims against commercial airlines. Denver in 2019, Atlanta in 2021, Houston in 2023. All 3 settled out of court under non-disclosure agreements. In 2 of the 3 incidents, the individual she accused of theft was a person of color. Your officers chose not to verify her identity or her history before arresting my client. They took her tears at face value and exercised not one verification step. Ford stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the terminal corridor, and the color left his face with the completeness of a tide going out. He looked at Diana. He looked at Raymond. He looked like a man who had just been told something he had suspected for the past 40 minutes, but had been hoping very specifically was not true. "Where is he?" Raymond said. While Raymond walked with Ford toward the security corridor, Diana peeled away at the first branching point with one of the private investigators, a man named Garrett, who had been with the firm for 9 years and operated with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people did in airports. "Security hub," Diana said. "Camera 6C. Everything from Carousel 6 in the last 70 minutes. Garrett was already moving. The airport security hub was 2 levels below the main terminal floor, staffed at this hour by 2 technicians and a shift supervisor who received Garrett's credentials and Diana's direct request with the slightly dazed compliance of people confronted with paperwork that outranked their confusion. The footage was pulled in 6 minutes. Diana watched it on a handheld monitor standing in the hub's low-lit corridor with the footage running at normal speed, then slow, then normal again. She watched Marcus Abels lift the bag. She watched Patricia Hollis enter the frame from the far side of the carousel. Not from the position she would have occupied if she had been waiting for her own bag to come off the belt, but from the opposite end, moving toward Marcus with the directness of a woman moving toward a goal rather than toward a location. She watched Patricia's hand close over Marcus's on the titanium handle. She watched the luggage tag get damaged in the grab. She watched Marcus being led away by Shaw. She forwarded to 4 minutes and 11 seconds later. She watched the belt continuing to cycle. She watched the rubber flaps part again. She watched a navy blue fabric suitcase, battered with a pink ribbon tied around the handle, emerge and begin its circuit. She watched Patricia Hollis re-enter the frame from the left side of the screen, look around once, lift the navy blue suitcase, and walk toward the terminal exit. She did not look back. She did not appear to be in distress. She did not appear to be searching for something. She appeared to be a woman collecting her bag and leaving, which was exactly what she was doing. Diana set the monitor down. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Garrett. "Find Hollis. She's still in the building. Don't let her leave the terminal." Then she picked up her briefcase and walked back toward the elevator. In the main terminal, Isabella Vega was still there. She had followed the situation as far as the security corridor door and then positioned herself 10 feet from it, her phone running the stream. Her expression calm, with the particular focus of someone who is committed to seeing something through to its end. The live stream counter read 63,000 viewers. The comment thread was moving too fast to read, but she caught fragments. "Those SUVs just pulled up outside. Is that Raymond Cross?" "Oh, they are done." She had looked up Raymond Cross's name when one of the comments had asked if he was the attorney getting out of the first car, and what she had found in 45 seconds of reading had caused her to say nothing out loud, but to readjust the angle of her phone so it was more carefully, deliberately pointed at the security corridor door. Thomas Greer was still in the terminal. He had not left. He had given his statement to Weston, or attempted to, since Weston had not been available, and he had instead given it to a junior officer who had written it down with the slightly uncertain penmanship of someone not sure if this was being recorded for the right reasons. He had watched Shaw come back out of the security corridor briefly to retrieve something, watched Weston make a phone call in the corridor with one hand pressed to her temple, watched the general energy of the situation shift from the controlled confidence of authority to something more like damage management. He had stayed because leaving felt like the wrong choice. He couldn't have articulated it more precisely than that. He had been a witness. He was still a witness. Witnesses didn't leave. Junior Officer Kyle Reyes had done the most important thing he had done in 8 months of employment, and he had done it alone, without authorization, without instruction, and without complete certainty that anyone would ever read what he wrote. He had found a quiet corner near the secondary exit and filled 3 pages of his notebook. He wrote the timestamp of Patricia Hollis's arrival in the carousel area, from the direction he had observed, which was the far side of Carousel 6 from where the bag had emerged. He wrote the timestamp of the grab. He wrote what he had and had not seen of the luggage tag during the confrontation. He wrote that at no point had he seen Patricia Hollis's bag and that he had searched the active carousel for it during and after the incident and found nothing matching any description she had provided. He wrote that he had raised a concern to Shaw during the incident and had been told to stand down. He wrote his own badge number at the bottom of each page and his signature. He held the notebook in both hands and looked at what he had written for a moment. And then he looked at the security corridor door, and then he looked at Raymond Cross, who was now at the entrance to that corridor, talking to Ford, and he straightened up. He walked toward them. Patricia Hollis walked out with her real bag, her battered navy blue bag, the one that had been on that carousel the entire time. The one she never needed anyone else's help to get. She had known from the very first moment, if your jaw just dropped, you are not alone. 63,000 people are watching this unfold live right now. And the man sitting in that holding room with a cuff on his wrist has no idea that the truth has already found its way in through the front door. Diana has the footage, Raymond is at the door, and an officer named Kyle Reyes is about to make the most important decision of his career. Hit subscribe, because what happens when Raymond Cross walks into that room and the bag gets opened and the camera footage plays? That is the part that nobody in Terminal 3 is ever going to forget. Raymond Cross stopped outside the security corridor, and he did something that looked to an observer like a pause. It was not a pause. It was the final organization of a sequence that was already complete in his mind, being arranged into the order in which it would be most effectively delivered. He turned to Captain Ford, who had been following him at the slightly breathless pace of a man trying to stay relevant to a situation that was moving faster than his authority could manage. "Before we go in," Raymond said, "I want you to understand the legal landscape of what your officers have created tonight." Ford opened his mouth. "Don't," Raymond said, not rudely, just with the economy of someone who has allocated a specific number of minutes to this and doesn't intend to use them on interruptions. He spoke for 90 seconds. He did not raise his voice. He did not use emotional language or rhetorical flourishes. He spoke in the flat, clear, sequential tone of a man reading a charge sheet into a recorder, because that was, in effect, what he was doing. Officer Shaw failed to administer Miranda rights at the point of detention. This is not a procedural technicality. It is a constitutional violation that invalidates any statement made by my client from the moment of detention forward and exposes Officer Shaw personally to civil liability. Officer Weston, as supervising officer on scene, failed in her duty to intervene in an unlawful arrest, making her co-liable for the same violation. The arresting officers seized private corporate property without a warrant, without the owner's consent, and without any legal basis for search. The physical restraints were applied with excessive force. I have photographic evidence of the bruising on my client's wrists, pending which will be documented before we leave this building tonight. And the entire action was initiated on the word of an individual with 3 prior documented instances of fraudulent travel claims, which your officers would have discovered in under 4 minutes if they had run a basic background check before making an arrest. He paused for exactly 1 second. By 6 o'clock this morning, Captain, every major network in this city will be running the story. I want you to be very clear in your decision-making over the next few minutes about which side of this story you intend to be on. Ford looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff that had appeared where he expected solid ground. We can address this internally, he said. And even as he said it, he seemed to hear how inadequate it was. That option closed 20 minutes ago, Raymond said, when the footage crossed 60,000 live viewers. Open the door, Captain. Before Ford could move, a voice came from down the hallway. Captain Ford. Ford turned. Raymond turned. Neither of them expected what they saw: a junior officer in his mid-20s, 8 months on the job, standing with 3 pages of handwritten notes held in both hands, and the specific expression of someone who has decided something and is not going to decide it differently. Reyes, Ford said, and the warning in his voice was the warning of a man trying to preserve a situation that was already unsalvageable. This is not the time. I need to enter a formal statement into the record, Sir Kyle said. His voice was careful, but it didn't waver. He was not performing courage. He was executing a decision he had already made, which is different and considerably more durable. I was present at Carousel 6 from the beginning of this incident. I observed Ms. Hollis's approach direction, which was from the far side of the carousel, not the side where a bag checked on Flight 771 would have emerged. I observed Mr. Abels lift the bag prior to Ms. Hollis reaching him. I observed the luggage tag damage occur during Ms. Hollis's contact with the bag. And I observed that at no point during or after the incident was Ms. Hollis in possession of any piece of luggage of her own, nor did I observe any bag matching her description emerge from the carousel while I was present. He held out the notebook pages. All of this is written in timestamp, sir. I'll add my signature for the official record. Raymond Cross looked at Kyle Reyes for a moment with the focused attention of a man who has just encountered something he didn't expect and is recalibrating around it. Then, without inflection, write it all down, Officer Reyes. Every detail, every timestamp. Do it in a formal statement before anyone in this hallway tells you to do otherwise. Kyle nodded once. He pulled out his pen. Ford looked at the notebook pages in Kyle's hand, then at Raymond Cross, then at the security corridor door. He understood what had just happened. The last factual defense available to the position his officers had taken tonight had just been removed. Not by the opposing legal team, but by one of his own people. Open the door, Captain Raymond said again. And this time Ford opened it. The door hit the concrete wall with the particular sound of metal striking something immovable at speed. Not violently, but conclusively, the sound of an entrance that was not asking permission. Shaw spun one hand, reflexively dropping to his belt. Weston's back straightened. The junior officer who had carried the Remova case into the room pressed himself slightly toward the far wall, the instinct of someone whose instinct was correct. Raymond Cross came through the door. He did not look at Shaw first, or at Weston, or at the room. He looked at Marcus Abels, at the steel cuff on the right wrist, at the faint red marks visible above the cuff's edge, at the posture of a man who had been sitting in this chair for 41 minutes, and had somehow maintained in that time the bearing of a person who had not been diminished by what was done to him. Something in Raymond's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room felt different. "Good evening, Marcus," he said. Raymond Marcus replied in exactly the tone with which he would have said hello in a conference room. Shaw recovered first. "Who are you? This is a restricted area. You can't just—" "I am Raymond Cross," he said. He didn't look at Shaw when he said it. He was still looking at Marcus, doing a careful visual assessment. Wrists, posture, face. Senior managing partner of Cross Navarro and Associates. I am legal counsel for Mr. Abels. Now he looked at Shaw, and it was a particular kind of look. The look of someone measuring exactly the distance between where they are and where they need to be. and if the handcuff that is currently attached to my client's wrist is not removed in the next 10 seconds, I will ensure that the civil rights lawsuit we file tonight names you personally, Officer Shaw, not the department, not the city of Chicago, not the airport authority, you personally as a defendant. Shaw looked at Weston. Weston looked at Ford, who had come in behind Raymond. Ford gave a single curt nod. Shaw's jaw worked for a moment. Then he reached for his keys. The key went into the lock. The ratchet released. The cuff swung open. Marcus brought both hands forward and rested them on the table in front of him, palms up. He looked at his wrists. The right one carried 2 distinct red indentations where the cuff had sat. The skin around them slightly puffed. The marks that would take on color over the next few hours and become the photographs that a paralegal was already moving into position to take. He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the marks. Then he looked at Raymond, and Raymond looked back at him, and in that exchange, which lasted approximately 1 second and contained no words, was the entire compressed weight of 6 years of professional relationship and the specific understanding between 2 people who both knew exactly what this night was and what it was going to become. Marcus stood. He stood the way he walked through the terminal, not performing steadiness but finding it, the body reorienting to its full height after confinement, the natural architecture reasserting itself. He adjusted the cuffs of his overcoat. He straightened. He was 6 feet 2 inches, and he used all of it. Mr. Abel's Diana Solis said, stepping into the room behind Raymond. She set her briefcase on the table beside the Remova case with a clean, authoritative click. Apologies for the travel time. The rain on the expressway. No apology necessary, Marcus said. Diana did not acknowledge Shaw or Weston immediately. She opened the briefcase, removed her tablet, and looked at Weston with the focused attention of someone who is prepared for a conversation and is ready to have it. Supervisor Weston, before we review the evidence, is there anything you'd like to state on the record at this moment regarding the circumstances of Mr. Abels's arrest? Weston looked between Diana and Raymond and Ford. She had the look of a person calculating available options and finding the list shorter than expected. We followed procedure, she said. We had a complaining witness. You had an accusation, Diana said, and she said it without heat, the way you correct a misstatement in a document. An accusation requires investigation. You skipped the investigation. What you had was a complaint, which is the beginning of a process, not the conclusion of one. She set the tablet on the table. Supervisor Weston, what is the checked baggage tag number for the piece of luggage Ms. Hollis claimed as hers? Weston said nothing. What is the manifest confirmation number for her bag on Flight 771? Weston said nothing. Did anyone at any point during this incident ask Ms. Hollis to produce her boarding pass, her baggage receipt, or any documentation of ownership for the case she was claiming? The silence in the room was the answer. Diana turned to the Remova case on the table. The American Airlines checked baggage manifest for Flight 771 from London Heathrow, which our office obtained 45 minutes ago, lists one checked item under the name Marcus Abels. Bag tag number 7749-ABLS. The tag on this case, which was damaged during Ms. Hollis's physical contact with the bag, carries that same number. She looked at Shaw. Would you like to see the manifest? Shaw looked at the floor. Raymond Cross placed one hand on the edge of the table, not on the case, but beside it. The gesture of a man claiming the space without touching the object he hasn't been given permission to touch yet. Marcus, he said. For the official record, which these body cameras are currently creating, please state your full name, your professional title, the bag tag number on this case, and the combination to the lock. Marcus moved to stand beside the case. He faced the camera on Shaw's chest, the small black rectangle with its red light, its unblinking record, and he spoke with the precision of someone who understood that every word was going to be listened to by people who had not been in this room. My name is Marcus Abels. I am the founder and CEO of Vertex Shield, a cybersecurity company headquartered in Chicago. The bag tag number on this case is 7749-ABLS. The combination to the lock is 916. He did not look away from the camera when he said the next part. There is no medication inside this case. There are no personal effects belonging to anyone named Patricia Hollis. This bag has never belonged to anyone other than me. The room held its breath. One more thing, Marcus said, and now his voice changed. Not louder, not sharper, but weighted differently. The tone of something that has been held in for a long time and is being released with control rather than with urgency. For the record, my company's contract with the City of Chicago covers network security for 4 municipal agencies. My team secured those agencies' data last year and prevented what would have been a very expensive breach. I mention this not as a credential I needed in order to deserve basic decency tonight. I mention it because I wanted on record that the system was not confused about who I was. The system knew exactly who I was. The confusion was not in the system. He nodded to Diana. Go ahead. Diana reached for the case. She aligned her fingers with the combination dials and turned them. 9, then 1, then 6. With the deliberate care of someone handling evidence in a case which this was. The dual locks released with 2 soft, simultaneous clicks that sounded in the silence of the room considerably louder than they were. Diana grasped the top handle and lifted the lid. She flipped it back, fully exposing the interior to the harsh fluorescent light, and she stepped aside. Shaw leaned forward before he could stop himself. The instinctive movement of a man who needed the contents to confirm what he had decided, who needed the jewelry and the medication and the silk scarves of Patricia Hollis's fiction to be there so that the narrative he had committed to could survive the night. They were not there. What was there? A server rack the size of a shoebox, matte black machined aluminum with the logo of Vertex Shield engraved into the casing with the kind of precision that came from a process that cost money. Fiber optic cables ran from its ports and were tucked in custom channels cut into the foam around it. The foam itself, and this was the detail that would be written into the formal report that would be noted in the civil suit that would be brought up in every subsequent legal proceeding, was a deep, specific shade of navy blue. Not the standard black or gray or beige of commercial configurations, not a color Remova offered, a color that had been custom ordered to match the exact brand specification of a company called Vertex Shield, the only such interior configuration in existence. Beside the server rack, 2 leather portfolio folders thick, their edges stamped with a classification notation. Inside, visible through the opening, the letterhead of a British government ministry. Beneath those separated by a layer of navy velvet, 3 suits folded with the mechanical precision of someone who had developed a specific system for packing and never deviated from it. And at the bottom of the case, under everything else, a book. Hardcover, well-handled, the cover worn at the corners from years of travel. The Art of War. Inside the front cover, visible when Diana lifted it briefly, a handwritten inscription in blue ink. The interior of that case was not the interior of a stolen bag. It was the interior of a life. Shaw did not speak. He looked at the server rack with the Vertex Shield logo. He looked at the navy foam. He looked at the government contract documents with their classification markings. He looked at the suits. He looked at the book. He took a step backward from the table. One step unconscious, the retreat of a person whose body has understood something before their mind has finished processing it. Weston was very still against the wall. Ford at the door had his eyes closed. Marcus looked at the interior of his case, at the navy foam and the server rack and the suits that had been packed with such care in a London hotel room 4 days ago, at the documents from 4 days of negotiations, at the book he had carried on 14 consecutive trips. And for a moment, the expression on his face was not composed or cold or controlled. It was tired, very profoundly tired, the way a person looks when they have been right about something at an enormous cost, and are standing in the moment where the rightness has been confirmed and the cost is still fully present. Then the expression was gone. He looked at Shaw. Officer Shaw. His voice was quiet. It did not fill the room. It occupied only as much space as it needed. My name is Marcus Abels. I have traveled to 24 countries in the past 19 months. I have security clearances that this terminal's systems are not configured to recognize. I closed a $47 million business deal in London 4 days ago. And tonight, You handcuffed me in front of several hundred people and walked me through a public terminal because a woman in a beige coat pointed at my bag and cried." Shaw looked at him. "I need you to look at what's in this case," Marcus said. "Not to prove anything to me. I don't need the proof. I'm asking you to look at it because I want you to remember this. The next time you walk into a room and see a black man holding something expensive, and the first thought your training sends you isn't a question, but a conclusion. I want you to remember that there was a night when that conclusion was catastrophically wrong. And I want you to ask yourself very seriously how many times you reached that conclusion and were wrong and never found out." Shaw looked at the case. He didn't say anything. Nobody in the room did. Diana Solis reached into her briefcase with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and knows it has arrived. She produced a tablet and set it on the center of the table. In the middle of the space, the screen angled so that Shaw, Weston, Ford, and the room's body cameras could all see it clearly. "This is footage from camera 6C, she said, positioned directly above carousel 6 in Terminal 3. Timestamp begins at 11:19 p.m. tonight. Our investigators pulled this footage 48 minutes ago directly from your security hub with the cooperation of your own night shift technical staff." She looked at Shaw, then at Weston. "I want to be clear, this footage has not been altered in any way. The timestamp visible in the bottom right corner of the frame is continuous and unbroken. What you are about to see is exactly what happened at Carousel 6 tonight." She pressed play. The footage was high definition, the angle directly overhead, the frame wide enough to capture the full width of the carousel and several feet on either side. The screen showed Carousel 6 at 11:22 p.m. The belt was moving. Bags were coming through. A tall figure in a charcoal overcoat stood to the left of the carousel mouth, approximately 3 paces back from the belt. The posture of a patient man, not a man scanning for an opportunity. The figure was still. He checked his phone once. He looked back at the carousel. The rubber flaps parted. The matte black aluminum of the Remova case slid down the ramp, the titanium handle catching the overhead camera light for a brief, clean flash. The tall figure in the charcoal overcoat took 2 steps forward. He gripped the handle. He lifted the case from the belt with one smooth motion, set it on the floor, extended the telescoping handle. He turned to leave. From the right side of the frame, from the far end of the carousel, the end opposite to where a bag coming down the chute would emerge, a figure in a beige coat moved into frame. The motion was not tentative. It was not the motion of a woman who had spotted her lost luggage and was moving to retrieve it before someone else picked it up. It was the motion of a woman moving toward a specific person rather than toward a specific object. And the distinction was visible, recorded, time-stamped, and irrefutable. The figure in the beige coat reached the tall figure. She grabbed the handle. The footage showed the grab clearly the angle of her body, the forward reach, the moment of contact. During the contact, the luggage tag on the side handle was visible in the frame being displaced, the outer sleeve twisting the card inside shifting. As you can see, Diana said, her voice carrying the specific flatness of someone delivering a verdict rather than a persuasion. Mr. Abels did not approach Ms. Hollis. He did not run past her. He lifted his bag from the belt, in a location and at a moment consistent with a man who had been standing at that carousel for several minutes waiting for his checked baggage. And Ms. Hollis approached him from the opposite side of the carousel. Shaw stared at the screen. Weston's arms, which had been crossed since they entered the room, slowly uncrossed. "Keep watching," Diana said. She advanced the footage. The timestamp moved forward 4 minutes 11 seconds. The frame now showed an emptier carousel area. Most of the passengers had collected their bags. The belt was still cycling. A few unclaimed items continued their slow circuit. The rubber flaps at the chute mouth parted again. Out came a navy blue fabric suitcase, worn at the edges, one corner cracked. A bright pink ribbon tied tightly around the plastic handle in the way of someone who wanted to identify their bag at a glance. The improvised luggage identification system of a person who traveled with luggage that looked exactly like everyone else's. The navy blue suitcase began its circuit on the belt. 11 seconds later, a figure in a beige coat entered the frame from the left side of the screen. She looked to the right. She looked to the left. She looked at the carousel. She moved to the belt, lifted the navy blue fabric suitcase from the surface, and walked out of the frame toward the terminal exit. She did not look back. She did not appear to be in distress. She did not appear to be searching for something. She appeared to be a woman collecting her bag and leaving, which was exactly what she was doing. The room was so quiet that the buzz of the fluorescent light was audible. "Her bag," Weston said. She was not saying it to anyone in particular. She was saying it the way a person says something when they need to hear it spoken to fully believe it. Her bag was on the carousel. Her bag was on the carousel the entire time, Diana confirmed. Patricia Hollis did not check a Remova aluminum classic on Flight 771. She checked a navy blue fabric suitcase. The bag she claimed Mr. Abels had stolen from her was not her bag. It has never been her bag. Ford turned away from the screen. He pressed both hands against the side of the metal table and stared at nothing for a moment, with the expression of a man computing a total he did not want to arrive at. "She knew," Marcus said. Everyone in the room looked at him. He had been quiet since the footage began, standing at the edge of the table, watching the screen with an expression that was not satisfaction and not surprise, but something closer to grief. The grief of confirmation. The grief of having been right about something you desperately wished you'd been wrong about. "She walked into that terminal and looked at my bag," he said. "She looked at the price of it and she looked at me holding it, and she decided that those two things didn't belong together. She created a scene, knowing how it would land, knowing who would be believed, knowing that the version of events she was selling had the advantage of being the version that already existed in people's heads before she said a word." He looked at Shaw. "And she was right about you. She was right about how you would read it. She handed you a conclusion, and you accepted it." Shaw said nothing. "She wasn't working alone," Marcus said. "She was working with something older than either of you. An assumption that doesn't need a script because it runs on its own." "Patricia Hollis has done this before," Diana said. She turned the tablet so the room could see the file. The 3 prior incidents, the settlement documents, the claims adjuster's notation from Denver, the airport security reports from Atlanta and Houston. 3 prior instances of disputed luggage claims at commercial airports. 2 of them involved a person of color as the accused party. All 3 were resolved without criminal charges, which means Ms. Hollis walked away from each situation with either money or the confidence that the approach worked. Weston looked at the documents. Her face was not performing anything anymore. It had the look of a person at the end of a long process of denial. She selected a target. Diana continued. She identified a piece of high-value luggage in the hands of someone she calculated would not be believed over her. And she executed a false accusation in a public space with the specific expectation that the security infrastructure of this airport would perform exactly as it did. Shaw sat down, not because anyone told him to, because his legs seemed to decide without consulting him that standing was no longer a sustainable position. Diana's phone buzzed. She looked at it and something settled in her expression. The final piece of a structure clicking into place. "Ms. Hollis is at gate B12, she said. "Still in the terminal. She hasn't left." She looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at Ford. Ford already had his radio in his hand. Raymond Cross moved to stand beside the table. "Marcus, I'd like you to remain here while we begin the formal documentation process." "I'm going back out," Marcus said. Raymond looked at him for 1 full second. It was the look of a lawyer assessing a client's state and asking a silent question, which Marcus answered without speaking, by holding Raymond's gaze steadily and without apology. "All right," Raymond said. They walked out of the holding room as a group. Marcus, Raymond, Diana, the paralegals, and Ford, who followed because he had run out of places to position himself in opposition. Shaw remained in the room. He sat at the metal table with his hands flat on its surface and did not speak to anyone. Weston followed them out of the room, then stopped in the hallway and stood with her back against the wall, her eyes looking at nothing particular. Kyle Reyes, still at the end of the corridor with his notebook, watched her stop and understood something about the specific quality of her stillness. He went back to writing. The baggage claim area of Terminal 3 was quieter than it had been at 11:23, but it was not empty. A number of passengers who had collected their bags had not left. Some of them had stayed because Isabella Vega's live stream visible on the airport's Wi-Fi had told them something was unresolved, and they wanted to see the resolution. Some of them had stayed because Thomas Greer had stayed, and there was something about his decision to remain that had communicated to the people around him that leaving felt wrong. Some of them had stayed because they had been there when it started, and something in them resisted leaving before the story finished. Isabella Vega was 10 feet from the security corridor door phone, steady stream, running. She had been there since Marcus went in. 89,000 people were watching. When the door opened and Marcus came through, no cuffs, full height, overcoat intact, Raymond Cross at his left shoulder, Isabella didn't say anything. She adjusted the angle of her phone and held it level. Marcus stopped in the middle of the carousel area. He didn't climb anything. He didn't gather the crowd. He just stopped in the open space of the terminal in the fluorescent light of an airport at midnight, with a matte black aluminum suitcase at his side, and the night still unresolved, and he spoke at a volume designed to reach the people near him rather than to perform for a room. My name is Marcus Abels. I am the founder and CEO of Vertex Shield, a cybersecurity company based in Chicago, Illinois. He said it simply, without ceremony, not like a declaration, like an introduction. Approximately 2 hours ago, I retrieved my own bag from Carousel 6 in this terminal. I was accused of theft. I was handcuffed. I was walked through this terminal in front of everyone here and placed in a holding room for 61 minutes. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not telling you this because I want your sympathy or your outrage or a reaction. I'm telling you because what happened to me tonight is not rare. It happens to people every single day who don't have Raymond Cross's phone number, who don't have a bag that opens to reveal a government contract, who don't have 89,000 people watching on a live stream. Several people in the terminal had their phones up. He did not look at the phones. He looked at the people holding them. Those people don't get attorneys in black SUVs. They get the room. They get the chair. They get the weight of the assumption pressing down on them with nothing on the other side of it. And they go home, when they go home, carrying something that doesn't have a name but doesn't go away. Thomas Greer, standing at the edge of the space, was very still. Kyle Reyes, behind the crowd, looked down at his notebook and then back up. I am going to ask something of you, Marcus continued. Not much. Just this. Remember what you saw tonight. Not the legal outcome, not the attorney, not the 3 SUVs. Remember the 4 minutes and 17 seconds it took to walk me through this terminal. Remember what it looked like. Remember what it felt like to watch. And if you are ever in a position, any position, where someone is being judged before they have been asked a single question, I'm asking you to ask the question, out loud, where it can be heard. He stopped. He had said what he intended to say. Ford approached Raymond, his voice lower now, the defensive energy gone, replaced with something closer to practical exhaustion. Mr. Cross, I want to cooperate fully with whatever process comes next. Shaw and Weston are being placed on administrative leave effective tonight, pending a full internal review. Administrative leave is a starting point, Raymond said, not an outcome. We'll be in contact about the formal process in the morning. Diana was already on her phone. Captain, there's a woman named Patricia Hollis currently at gate B12 in this terminal. She's carrying a navy blue fabric suitcase with a pink ribbon on the handle. She needs to be formally detained on suspicion of filing a false police report, making fraudulent claims, and battery. The physical contact with my client during the luggage grab constitutes battery under Illinois law. She paused. Please make sure the officers you send are not Shaw. Ford did not hesitate. He raised his radio. Isabella Vega's live stream counter ticked past 94,000. Somewhere in the torrent of comments, one surfaced and held near the top. He didn't come out angry. He came out with words. That says more than anything else about who he is. Patricia Hollis was sitting in the third row of gate B12's seating area when the night caught up with her. She had positioned herself with her back to the main terminal corridor in a seat that faced the gate windows, the navy blue fabric suitcase standing upright between her feet, its pink ribbon slightly drooped from the evening's travel. She was drinking a cup of herbal tea purchased from a kiosk near the gate, and she was scrolling through her phone with the practiced inattention of a woman who had decided the evening's adventure was over. She did not know her face had been visible in Isabella Vega's stream since the beginning of the incident. She did not know that a clip of her walking out of the carousel area with the navy blue suitcase, 4 minutes and 11 seconds after Marcus Abels had been taken away in handcuffs, had been viewed by the time the 2 Terminal 3 officers reached Gate B12 approximately 214,000 times. She did not know any of this. She thought she had been careful. She thought she had been, as she had been 3 times before, invisible. Ms. Hollis. She turned at the sound of her name. A reflex, not a choice. 2 airport officers stood in the gate entrance. They were not Shaw. They were not Weston. They were 2 people who had been given a task in the full context of why it mattered, and they approached with the particular composure of officers who understood that the situation in their hands was already fully documented, and that their job was simply to execute. Patricia looked at the officers. She looked at the navy blue suitcase between her feet. She looked back at the officers, and something in her face, the specific arrangement of her features in the half-second before the performance could be assembled, said everything. "We need you to come with us, Miss Hollis," the first officer said. Patricia pressed her hand to her chest. She opened her mouth. She began to compose the expression. "Ma'am," the second officer said, and his voice was quiet and even, without hostility, but also without any available purchase for manipulation. "We have the carousel footage, all of it." The expression she was composing did not fully arrive. She looked at the navy blue suitcase. She looked at the terminal, at the other passengers at the gate who were beginning to turn, and look at the phone of the person 3 seats away that was already pointing toward her. "All right," she said, quietly, without performance. She reached down and picked up the handle of the navy blue suitcase. She followed the officers out of the gate. A passenger at gate B12, someone who had been watching Isabella Vega's stream since the carousel incident and had recognized the beige coat when Patricia sat down, captured a 12-second clip of Patricia Hollis being approached by officers and standing up from her seat with the navy blue suitcase. Isabella reposted it within 40 seconds of it appearing online. The clip joined the stream at 12:43 a.m. and reached 300,000 views before sunrise. The comments were not gloating and not triumphant. The most liked comment by a significant margin read simply, "She came for someone else's bag and left with her own consequences." Thomas Greer saw the clip on his phone while still in the terminal. He read it twice, then set his phone down on the gate seating beside him and sat quietly for a moment. He was not thinking about the clip. He was thinking about the 4 minutes and 17 seconds it had taken to walk a man in handcuffs through a terminal in front of hundreds of people, and he was thinking about the version of that story that ended differently. The version where no one filmed it, where no one spoke up, where the attorney wasn't called, where the case never got opened. He thought about how close that version had been to being this version. He picked up his phone and called his attorney in the morning. Not about the incident, about the charity he had been meaning to get around to funding for 2 years and had been putting off. Marcus Abels stood near Carousel 6 one final time before leaving the terminal. The belt had stopped moving. The carousel area was quiet now the crowd dispersed. The fluorescent lights unchanged in their thin mechanical hum. The floor was still scuffed and slightly damp from a night's worth of rolling suitcases. He stood there with the Rimowa case beside him, the titanium handle extended, and he looked at the carousel. At the spot where the rubber flaps had parted and his case had appeared at 11:22 p.m. At the spot where Patricia Hollis had entered the frame from the wrong side and reached for what was not hers. Isabella Vega approached him. She had ended the live stream 5 minutes earlier, a decision she had made without comment, just a quiet tap on the screen, the moment concluding when it concluded rather than being stretched for engagement. She held her phone at her side. "Mr. Abels," she said. "Thank you for staying." Marcus looked at her. "You were here the whole time." "Someone had to be," she said. He thought about that. "Make sure they hear it right," he said. "Not just the arrest, the whole thing. The walk across the terminal, the room, all of it." "All of it," she said. He picked up the telescoping handle of the Rimowa case, the familiar click of it fully extending, the familiar weight of the case as it shifted onto its wheels, the familiar gesture of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He walked toward the exit. Raymond Cross fell into step beside him without a word. Diana Solis on the other side. Outside, through the glass sliding doors, the 3 Lincoln Navigators waited in the wet Chicago night, their engines running, their headlights painting pale columns through the drizzle. The doors opened. The cold air came in. Marcus walked through. Shaw and Weston did not return to active duty. The administrative review that Captain Ford initiated that night concluded 3 months later with findings that led to their formal separation from the airport police division. Not with the quiet resignation of a process that wanted to disappear, but with documentation and a public statement from the department that used the word accountability in a sentence rather than in a press release. Kyle Reyes's 3 pages of handwritten notes were entered into the record on the first day of that review. His account was the only eyewitness testimony from within the department that aligned with the camera footage, and the review board noted this clearly. 8 months later, Kyle Reyes became the youngest officer in the airport division's history to be formally recognized for integrity in the field. In his remarks at the small ceremony, he said almost nothing about what he had done. He said only, "I almost didn't write it down." He paused. "I think about that." Patricia Hollis faced charges she could not settle quietly this time, because the footage existed, because the witnesses were on record, and because Diana Solis had assembled a case built from 3 prior incidents that the non-disclosure agreements had hidden but not erased. The trial was not long. The jury did not deliberate long either. Marcus Abels did not hold a press conference. He did not give interviews about the night or write an essay about it, or allow it to become the thing he was known for, rather than the thing he had built. What he did, quietly, without announcement 8 weeks after the night at Terminal 3, was establish a fund. He called it the 7749 Initiative after the bag tag number that had been partially obscured on the leather tag that Patricia Hollis had damaged when she grabbed at something that wasn't hers. The fund provided legal representation for people wrongfully detained in transit, airports, train stations, bus terminals, who did not have Raymond Cross in their contacts. Isabella Vega was the first journalist to cover it, in a piece that ran on her platform before it was picked up by 3 larger publications. She did not describe the fund as a revenge or a statement or a victory. She described it as what it was: a man who turned the worst night of his year into someone else's second chance. Thomas Greer read that piece on a Tuesday morning over coffee and then made a phone call to his attorney that he had been putting off. He became one of the initiative's first external donors. He did not tell Marcus. He did not need to. 3 months after the night at Carousel 6, Marcus Abels flew through Chicago O'Hare International Airport again. Terminal 3, the same terminal. By design, he did not choose a different terminal. He did not arrange to be routed through a different airport. He stood at Carousel 6 and waited for the Rimowa case, the same titanium handle that his engineering team had machined from a block of aircraft-grade metal and presented to him in a small velvet box. And when it came off the belt, he lifted it the same way he always had. Nobody ran at him from the other side of the carousel. Nobody screamed. Nobody reached for a radio before asking a question. He extended the handle, felt the familiar click of it locking into place, and walked toward the exit. In the elevator from the baggage level, a young man in a university sweatshirt looked at the case and then looked up. "That's a beautiful bag," he said with the easy, unpracticed admiration of someone who didn't know the story and wasn't thinking about a story at all. Just saw a beautiful bag and said so. "Thank you," Marcus said. "It's been through a lot." The young man smiled and looked back at his phone. The elevator opened. Marcus walked out into the Chicago night, the case rolling smooth on the damp terminal floor. The city spread out ahead of him in the dark and the wet and the unfinished business of being alive in it. He did not look back at the terminal, not because he had forgotten. He had not forgotten, would not forget, carried it the way you carry things that have made you into the shape you are, but because he had turned it into something that moved forward. And forward was the only direction worth walking. Dignity was never something Marcus Abels had to prove. The world just kept forgetting that, until it couldn't anymore. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your worth has never been up for debate, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach the people who need to hear it. Share this video with someone in your life who has ever been judged before anyone asked their name. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Because the stories we tell here are built for people who believe that dignity doesn't need a dress code, and justice doesn't need a spotlight to be real. Drop your city in the comments. Tell us what part of tonight's story hit you hardest. We read every single one. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, the truth always finds its way out. It just sometimes needs a little help from a titanium handle and 27 minutes. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, events, and incidents depicted in this story are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental.